Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at some pretty intense geopolitical maneuvering happening right now.
Yeah.
You guys are clearly interested in what's happening with Algeria and Morocco right now, and trust me, things are getting a little bit spicy.
They certainly are.
Yeah. So we got a whole stack of sources here, articles, expert analyses, all painting a fascinating picture of shifting alliances, internal tensions, and some pretty high-stakes power plays.
That's right.
Yeah, we'll be diving into the Western Sahara conflict, of course.
Of course.
With the Polisario front caught in the middle.
Right.
But also looking at how countries like Mauritania and even Syria are being pulled into this unfolding drama.
Yeah, it's fascinating how seemingly unrelated events
Right.
can trigger just a cascade of reactions across the globe.
Oh, for sure.
For example, the regime change in Syria.
Yeah.
A world away seems to be causing ripples of anxiety all the way in Algiers. And that anxiety is playing out against a backdrop of Algeria's own internal struggles.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation.
Okay, so let's dive into this Algerian anxiety you mentioned.
Yeah.
What are we seeing that points to this?
Right.
It's not like they're issuing public statements saying, hey, we're totally freaked out over here.
Well, not in those exact words, of course.
Right.
But think about it. President Tebboune has been giving speeches at an almost alarming rate lately.
Oh, really?
Multiple addresses to the nation, pronouncements on economic policy, you name it.
Wow.
This kind of hypercommunication from a leader often suggests an attempt to project an image of stability and control when things might actually be quite shaky.
It's like when you try to over-explain something, it makes people suspicious that you're not being entirely truthful.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the actions of some pro-government individuals are even more telling.
Okay.
Remember that incident where a Tebboune supporter in France was arrested for threatening violence against those protesting the regime? That speaks volumes about the level of tension and division that exists within Algeria.
Yeah.
It suggests that the anxiety isn't just confined to the halls of government. It's permeating society as a whole.
And we can't ignore the fact that Algeria is facing some real economic headwinds right now.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we've seen reports of crumbling infrastructure,
Yeah.
public transportation in a dismal state,
Yes.
hospitals struggling to keep up.
Uh-huh.
Yet at the same time, we see these videos of lavish ministerial meetings, opulent displays of wealth that seem jarringly out of touch with the struggles of everyday Algerians.
Right.
It's a stark contrast, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It fuels the perception that the government is more concerned with maintaining its own power and privilege than with addressing the very real problems facing the people. And when people feel like their basic needs are being ignored,
Yeah.
it can be a recipe for social unrest.
Speaking of unrest,
Yeah.
this next story is almost unbelievable. Mali, of all countries, has essentially told Algeria to butt out of their affairs.
Right.
I mean, how often do you see one country publicly call out another like that?
It's a major diplomatic slap in the face.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the growing frustration that Mali feels with Algeria's attempts to influence their internal politics. What's particularly interesting is that Mali specifically mentioned the Kabyle issue in their rebuke.
Oh, wow.
Now, for those who might not be familiar,
Right.
the Kabyles are a Berber ethnic group in Algeria that has long been pushing for greater autonomy. They've often clashed with the central government, and it's a very sensitive issue for Algiers.
So Mali is essentially poking at a pressure point,
Yeah.
highlighting a source of internal weakness within Algeria.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, you've got enough problems at home. Maybe you should focus on those before trying to dictate what we do.
Right.
And this isn't an isolated incident.
Really?
Libya is getting a similar message. A former Libyan ambassador is warning his country not to get too cozy with Algeria, particularly in its stance against Morocco and the Western Sahara conflict.
Wow.
He's essentially saying, don't hitch your wagon to a falling star.
So we're seeing this pattern emerge where other countries are becoming increasingly wary of Algerian involvement in their affairs.
Yeah.
It's like they sense weakness, and they're distancing themselves to avoid getting caught in the crossfire.
That's a very astute observation.
Thanks.
And it's interesting to contrast this with the fanfare surrounding Algeria's recent appointment to the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council.
Oh, right.
You know, the one that lasts for a whole month.
Yeah, I remember them making a big deal about it, as if it was some major victory.
Right.
Did they think it would give them more leverage in the Western Sahara situation?
There's been a lot of talk about how Algeria might use this temporary position to push their agenda on the Western Sahara.
Yeah.
But honestly, the power of that position is quite limited. It's unlikely they'll be able to significantly influence any decisions regarding the conflict.
And it's not like their messaging on the Western Sahara has been clear and consistent.
No, it hasn't.
Some Algerian officials seem to acknowledge the issue's importance,
Right.
while others downplay it.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're unsure of how to proceed,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as Morocco gains international support for its autonomy plan.
That's a good point. It does seem like there might be some internal disagreements
Yeah.
within the Algerian government about how to handle the situation.
Mm.
And let's be honest, they're still clinging to some pretty outdated arguments,
Good.
referencing resolutions from the 1960s that are no longer relevant to the current realities on the ground.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like they're trying to fight a 21st century geopolitical battle
Yeah.
with a 20th century playbook.
That's a great analogy.
And while they're stuck in the past,
Yeah.
we're seeing some really interesting developments on the other side of the equation. Specifically, it seems like Mauritania might be shifting its stance on the Western Sahara.
Oh, really?
They've traditionally maintained a neutral position,
Right.
but there are signs that they might be leaning towards supporting Morocco.
Interesting.
This could be a huge game changer.
It feels like we're watching this real-time chess match unfold,
Yeah.
with each move carrying huge implications.
Yeah, it really is.
But, focusing back on Algeria,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about their external struggles,
Yeah.
the diplomatic pushback, the shifting alliances.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier that Algeria is facing some pretty deep-rooted internal challenges as well.
Oh, yeah.
What's the situation on the ground there? Are things as tense domestically as they seem from the outside?
You know, it's more than just those economic woes we mentioned,
Yeah.
although those are definitely a major factor.
Yeah.
There seems to be this growing disconnect between the government's narrative of progress
Uh-huh.
and the lived reality of many Algerians.
So when President Tebboune talks about, economic revival,
Right.
entering the ranks of, emerging nations, that's not quite resonating with the average person on the street.
Exactly. Think about it. You're dealing with crumbling infrastructure,
Yeah.
unreliable public services.
Right.
Then you hear these grand pronouncements about economic transformation.
Yeah.
It's easy to see why many Algerians are skeptical,
For sure.
especially when those pronouncements aren't reflected in their daily lives.
And it's not just the economy, right?
Right.
Tebboune frequently emphasizes, national unity working together.
Right.
But given the incidents we've discussed, like that arrest in France for threatening anti-government protesters,
Mm-hmm.
does that message of unity ring true?
That's the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
There's a sense that the government's rhetoric is increasingly at odds with the reality on the ground.
Hmm.
The arrest you mentioned,
Yep.
the continued suppression of the Kabyle movement,
Right.
these actions don't exactly scream unity.
So it's almost like they're trying to paper over some very deep cracks in Algerian society
Mhm.
with this talk of unity and progress.
It's a classic case of a regime feeling threatened and
Mhm.
trying to project an image of strength that may not match the underlying realities.
Right.
And this internal pressure cooker has huge implications for Algeria's foreign policy.
Okay.
It explains, at least in part, their rigid stance on the Western Sahara.
You're saying that their internal struggles are actually influencing how they're approaching this international conflict.
Absolutely. Think about it.
Yeah.
The Western Sahara issue has become a cornerstone of Algerian foreign policy.
Right.
It's almost an article of faith at this point.
Yeah.
To admit defeat, to concede to Morocco's autonomy plan,
Ah.
would be a massive blow to the government's credibility and their sense of national pride.
Yeah.
It would be seen as a capitulation, an admission of weakness,
Mm-hmm.
precisely at a time when they're trying to project strength and unity.
So they're caught in this vicious cycle. Internal anxieties fueling a rigid foreign policy,
Exactly.
which in turn makes them more resistant to compromise and adaptation.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're digging themselves deeper into a hole.
That's a great way to put it. They're so focused on this rivalry with Morocco
Mhm.
that they're failing to adapt to the changing realities of the geopolitical landscape.
Right.
While Morocco is forging new alliances, building economic partnerships,
Right.
Algeria seems stuck in the past, clinging to these outdated legal arguments and Cold War-era alliances.
It's almost like, remember that story about the boxer who refused to change his style? even though it was clearly getting him pummeled.
Mm-hmm.
And his coach was begging him to adapt, to be more flexible, but he just wouldn't budge.
And he ended up losing the fight,
Yeah.
likely doing more damage to himself in the process.
Oh,
It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Algeria is clinging to a strategy that's no longer effective, and it's hurting their own interests.
Yeah.
They need to evolve to be more pragmatic if they want to avoid getting completely knocked out of the game.
So what would a more pragmatic approach look like for Algeria? Is there a way for them to salvage this situation and come out on top?
The first step is acknowledging the reality on the ground.
Oh.
The international community is increasingly recognizing the legitimacy of Morocco's autonomy plan for the Western Sahara.
Right.
Continuing to oppose it just makes Algeria look obstructionist and out of touch.
Wouldn't accepting the autonomy plan be a major concession for Algeria?
Yeah.
Wouldn't they lose face by backing down from their long-held position?
It would undoubtedly be a difficult pill to swallow, a blow to their pride.
Yeah.
But sometimes knowing when to fold is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Interesting.
Think about it. What do they gain by clinging to this losing strategy?
Yeah.
A resolution to the Western Sahara conflict would open up incredible opportunities for Algeria.
Okay.
Imagine the economic potential if they were to normalize relations with Morocco. To join this wave of regional integration,
Yeah.
they could finally focus on addressing those internal challenges, boosting their economy and building a more prosperous future for their people.
It sounds like a classic case of, cutting your losses
Yeah,
to achieve a long-term gain.
exactly.
But shifting gears a bit,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about this trend of regional integration sweeping across North Africa.
Right.
What's driving this? Why are countries like Mauritania and Senegal so eager to jump on board?
It boils down to self-interest
Okay.
and a recognition of shared challenges.
Hmm.
These countries are pragmatic.
Right.
They see the economic benefits of aligning themselves with Morocco, a country with a growing economy and a stable political system.
Yeah.
They also recognize the security threats in the region,
Right.
the rise of extremist groups, the instability in the Sahel,
Yeah.
and they're realizing that they're stronger together when it comes to facing these challenges.
So it's not just about economics, it's about collective security as well.
Right.
And for a country like Mauritania, which has historically struggled with both economic development and security threats, this alignment with Morocco seems like a win-win.
Exactly. They're looking at Morocco's success and saying, we want a piece of that.
Right.
And they see the value in pooling resources,
Yeah.
sharing expertise, and presenting a united front to the world.
Mhm.
And it's not just about Morocco.
Yeah.
It's about creating a stronger, more integrated North Africa,
Right.
a region that can compete on the global stage, attract investment, and ensure its own security.
And what about Algeria? They seem to be on the outside looking in as this new regional order takes shape.
Right.
Have they missed the boat on this?
They've certainly missed opportunities.
Yeah.
Their fixation on the rivalry with Morocco has blinded them to the potential benefits of cooperation and partnership. They've neglected to cultivate strong relationships with their other neighbors,
Right.
and now they're finding themselves increasingly isolated.
So they're in a real bind. Their internal anxieties are pushing them towards a confrontational foreign policy,
Exactly.
which is further alienating them from potential allies and economic partners. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's a classic catch-22.
Yeah.
And it raises the question, what will it take for them to break free from this cycle?
Right.
Will they continue down this path of isolation and decline?
Yeah.
Or will they finally recognize the need for a course correction?
It feels like we're approaching a tipping point.
I think so too.
The stakes are high,
Yeah.
and the consequences of inaction could be devastating for Algeria.
Right.
But with all these swirling forces at play, it's impossible to predict what will happen next.
And that's what makes this whole situation so fascinating, so unpredictable.
Absolutely.
We're watching a geopolitical drama unfold in real time,
Totally.
and the next act could be the most dramatic yet.
Okay.
But before we jump into the potential scenarios,
Yeah.
I want to share a thought-provoking story I came across.
Okay, you got me hooked. What's this story that has you so intrigued?
Well, I was reading about this ancient civilization, the Nabateans. You know, the ones who built that incredible city of Petra carved into the rock?
Oh, yeah, Petra. It's like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Exactly. But here's the thing. the Nabateans weren't just amazing architects, they were also brilliant strategists.
Okay.
They thrived for centuries in this really harsh desert environment, surrounded by all these powerful empires,
Wow.
and they do it by being incredibly adaptable. They were masters of diplomacy, forging alliances, and playing rivals off against each other.
Hmm.
They were also shrewd traders, controlling these vital trade routes, accumulating wealth. But most importantly, they were willing to evolve.
Interesting.
They knew when to compromise, when to adapt their strategies to the changing realities around them.
So what you're saying is that the Nabateans, despite facing all these immense external pressures,
Yeah.
managed to not only survive but thrive because of their ability to adapt and evolve.
Exactly. And that's the lesson I think Algeria needs to take to heart.
Okay.
They're facing a similar situation right now. Intense external pressures, shifting alliances, a changing geopolitical landscape.
Right.
And if they want to not only survive, but thrive in this new environment,
Yeah.
they need to embrace that Nabatean spirit. They need to be willing to adapt their approach, to be more flexible in their diplomacy, and to recognize that sometimes compromise is the key to long-term success.
So you're suggesting that Algeria should look to the ancient Nabateans as a model for how to navigate their current predicament.
Think about it. The Nabateans were masters of playing the long game. They understood that clinging to rigid ideologies or these outdated strategies could be fatal. They were willing to make concessions, to adapt to the changing winds in order to secure their long-term interests. And that's precisely the kind of mindset that Algeria needs to embrace if they want to overcome their current challenges and emerge as this strong and prosperous nation.
So circling back to the Western Sahara, if Algeria were to adopt this more flexible Nabatean approach, what concrete steps could they take? What would a pragmatic path forward look like?
Well, the first step would be to acknowledge the reality on the ground.
Right.
The international community is increasingly coalescing around Morocco's autonomy plan.
Right.
Continuing to oppose it is only further isolating Algeria and making them look out of touch with global opinion.
Yeah.
They need to recognize that accepting the autonomy plan is not a sign of weakness, but rather a pragmatic step that opens the door to a whole range of possibilities.
So it's about recognizing that sometimes you have to give a little to get a lot.
Precisely. And what they stand to gain is significant.
Okay.
Normalizing relations with Morocco would unlock this tremendous economic potential.
Yeah.
Allowing Algeria to join that regional economic bloc we talked about, they could finally focus on attracting foreign investment, diversifying their economy, and addressing those internal challenges that have been holding them back.
It's almost like choosing to fight this losing battle versus opening a door to a whole new world of opportunities.
That's a great way to put it. And let's not forget the security aspect.
Right.
By working with Morocco, they could create a united front against the growing threat of extremism in the Sahel region.
Yeah.
That's something that benefits everyone involved.
It sounds like a win-win scenario.
Yeah.
Greater economic prosperity, enhanced security.
Yeah.
And a chance to finally resolve this decades-long conflict. But that all hinges on Algeria making that crucial first step, that leap of faith towards a more pragmatic and collaborative approach.
And that's the big question that hangs over everything. Does Algeria have the political will, the vision, to make that leap?
Right.
Will they cling to the old ways, or will they embrace a new path? Only time will tell.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear. The choices they make in the coming months and years will have profound implications not only for Algeria, but for the entire region.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from shifting alliances and power plays to internal anxieties and the search for a pragmatic path forward.
Absolutely.
It's clear that things in this region are far from settled.
Yeah.
We'll be watching closely to see how it all unfolds.
Me too.
And remember that lesson from the Nabateans: adaptability, flexibility, a willingness to evolve. Those are the qualities that allow nations to not only survive, but thrive in a world of constant change.
I completely agree.
Words to live by, for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll be back soon to explore more fascinating stories and thought-provoking insights from around the world.